15 talents of silver. That is the staggering, absolutely massive ransom, we're talking hundreds of thousands of modern dollars, that the ancient Egyptian government gladly and deliberately just walked away from. Why? To steal original Greek tragedies. They didn't want the ships. They didn't even want the land. They literally just wanted the ink on the papyrus. See, when you think of the Ptolemaic dynasty ruling Egypt right after Alexander the Great, you probably imagine these peaceful, quiet librarians meticulously organizing scrolls in candlelit rooms. But they were actually aggressive, state-sponsored book pirates. Under a ruthless edict called the Ship's Law, every single vessel docking in Alexandria's harbor got searched by royal agents. If they found a scroll on board, confiscated immediately, handed straight to teams of scribes. Those scribes would quickly make a copy, hand that fresh copy back to a very bewildered ship owner, and the government just kept the original.
This wasn't just petty theft. This aggressive confiscation fed an absolute engine of antiquity. The ambition here, kicked off by Ptolemy I Soter around 295 BC, wasn't just to have a nice big library. No, the goal was to possess a copy of literally every single work ever written in every language from every civilization on Earth. Through obsessive, almost maniacal purchasing and confiscating across Mediterranean book markets, they built an impossible collection. We are looking at between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. It is so hard to translate that into modern terms. But without a doubt, this was the largest single concentration of human knowledge ever assembled before the printing press. It was like they were downloading the entire ancient internet, one physical scroll at a time.
Now, to actually make sense of all this raw information, the Ptolemies brought in the absolute brightest minds of the age. They paid them royal stipends, gave them free housing, free meals, and, get this, completely exempted them from all taxes. One rather jealous ancient critic actually described these pampered scholars as fattened fowls in a coop. But honestly, this coop was unlike anything else on Earth. It was called the Mouseion, or Temple of the Muses. And this wasn't just a quiet reading room attached to some dusty shelves. Think lecture halls, state-of-the-art laboratories, sprawling botanical gardens, and even a zoo. It was essentially the NASA of antiquity, a massive, heavily funded research and development complex acting as the intellectual heartbeat of the ancient world.
And man, those fattened fowls absolutely delivered. Euclid walked these very halls and wrote his Elements, literally laying down the foundational geometry textbook for the next 2,000 years. Eratosthenes used shadows cast in 2 different cities to calculate the entire circumference of the Earth with just shocking accuracy. Herophobos performed the first systematic human dissections, mapping out our nervous system. And Callimachus? He wrote essentially the world's very first library catalog, inventing the exact categorization systems we still use today.
What's truly wild here is the staggering time gap between when these things were discovered and when we finally rediscovered them. Aristarchus of Samos proposed that the Earth revolves around the sun right there in Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. That is 17 centuries before Copernicus published the exact same heliocentric theory. These ancient innovators were looking at the exact same truths we rely on today, just millennia ahead of schedule.
And it wasn't just hardcore science either. The Mouseion was the ultimate cross-cultural translator. Famously, 72 scholars gathered here to translate the Hebrew Torah into Greek, creating the Septuagint. Works in Persian, Babylonian, Egyptian, you name it, they were systematically translated, making this place the premier, unmatched repository of universal human knowledge.
So, how exactly do you erase a collection of this impossible magnitude? It's a massive, towering question. The popular myth, the one you always hear, is that it all went up in one catastrophic, incredibly dramatic blaze.
But the reality is actually much sadder. The loss wasn't a single explosive event. It was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts. It started back in 48 BC when Julius Caesar's troops set fire to ships in the harbor, accidentally burning waterfront warehouses that held 40,000 irreplaceable texts. The institution limped on after that, but then Emperor Aurelian's troops heavily damaged the main library quarter during a battle in 272 AD. Finally, in 391 AD, a mob led by the Christian patriarch Theophilus destroyed the daughter library in the Serapeum. It was just centuries of political instability, warfare, and shifting priorities that slowly, painfully starved the library to death.
And the true cost of that slow death is completely devastating. For example, we know the ancient playwright Sophocles wrote an estimated 123 plays. You know how many we have today?
Exactly 7. Think about that. 116 masterpieces of human culture just vanished entirely into the ash. The survival rate for Euripides is equally catastrophic. Out of roughly 92 plays, only 18 survive. The overwhelming majority of classical literature simply ceased to exist. Why? Because the one major place safeguarding it was allowed to just crumble. And we aren't just talking about poetry and plays. We lost the complete works of Aristarchus. We lost Eratosthenes' highly accurate maps of the known world, maps with incredibly precise coastlines. Entire intellectual traditions from Babylon, Persia, and India, right alongside vital engineering manuals and medical proofs, all completely wiped from human memory.
But here is perhaps the most shocking casualty of all. In the 1st century AD, an Alexandrian engineer named Hero actually built a machine that harnessed steam to create rotational movement. Let that sink in for a second. He built a working steam engine in the 1st century.
Humanity was literally staring right at the ignition key to the Industrial Revolution. But because the institutions of knowledge were slowly collapsing around him, Hero's monumental invention was treated as just a novelty, a mere toy. Because of that loss of momentum, it would take humanity roughly 1,600 years, all the way until Thomas Newcomen in 1712, to figure out how to build a practical steam engine again. 16 entire centuries of delay. When you realize a working steam engine was just sitting in a room in antiquity, spinning away as a novelty, it completely changes how you look back at those hundreds of thousands of burned scrolls. It forces you to wonder what else was lost to the ash.